You're listening to the Pulled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pulled by the Root podcast. I am overjoyed today to introduce you to Jacquelin Taybron. She's an international adoptee with a story that reads like a movie. She also sent me the best bio I think I've ever read. This is what Jacquelin says. She is a rootin', tootin', straight dope shootin', unfiltered freak of nature, completely unmedicated and unapologetic international adoptee. She is also a cool ass ex-wife and highly successful co-parent and grandparent. And just to top it off, she says she's a tree-hugging, patchouli-wearing Aquarius. Yes, Jacquelin. Yes, girl. Oh, thank you so much for that. That just already tells me that your personality is just full of sparkle. So Jacquelin, I was telling you before we pushed record that as I studied your story, there were so many things that really gripped me. Yeah. You know, and I'm just going to tease our audience a little. Kidnapping, sure. Germany, a governess, art, music, reunion. There are so many things, and I just would love for you to start wherever you want, and we'll just go from there.
Well, sure. I think, and first of all, let me just say, I'm so happy to have this opportunity to share this space with you for sure. I guess I'll just start at the beginning. Yeah. So I was adopted in Germany I was born in 1964. My adoption was finalized in 1965. And I think what made my situation a little different is I never spent let me back up a little bit. My mother, my biological mother, had 4 girls. All of us have 4 different fathers who were all American GIs. So our story was largely, manipulated and kind of controlled by social norms at that time. I am the youngest of my mother's 4 daughters, and my oldest sister is exactly, almost to the day, 10 years older than I. So my mother survived Hitler's Germany and all of that, and she kept 2 children and raised them, and then 2 of us were put up for adoption. A lot to wrap your mind around, but it was just a circumstance and my grandmother on my mother's side was also a Nazi sympathizer. So my mother had very little familial support around her choices to have these children. She was even married to my next oldest sister's father. So that was interesting when I started to search, because I really wasn't searching. It was kind of a quasi collection of information along the way, because I knew early on that I was adopted, but I felt well loved. So I wasn't really moved to dig any deeper until I got older. But to find that out, was really interesting, and to see how those decisions impacted all 4 of our lives. There's one sister, we still have no idea where she is. We know the other one that was put up for adoption. And my oldest sister has scant memories because they were only 2 years apart, where we were 10 years apart. So she remembers the day that they took me to my family, because they were actually my second foster home. That's where the whole governess piece came from. When my mother recognized that, okay, let me backtrack. My mom was married to my next oldest sister's father, who was an American GI. So at some point they left Germany and they came to the States. And I think she was excited to leave Germany and have this life. But he was an unhealthy man. He was alcoholic, and an alcoholic in the military has it's kind of a slap on the wrist and send you somewhere else so you can be someone else's problem instead of getting rid of you. So she uprooted her life thinking she was coming for something better. Got here, and actually he was from Michigan, Detroit specifically, and it just ended up not being a good thing. And so she packed up and left him and went back to Germany with the 2 daughters that she had, his child and my oldest sister. And as soon as she got back to Germany, she had a mental breakdown and ended up in the hospital. And that's where she met my father. And my father was a military officer who did a radio show that had something to do with the medical staff at the hospital. So the rest, as they say, is history. I've not ever met my father, but I have information about him. And my oldest sister actually remembers him and remembers what a wonderful person he was. And somehow over the years, that's kind of been enough for me. My sisters, because of their own experiences, really, they're men bashers. They don't, and so to hear glowing things about my father from them made kind of all the difference for me, and but so long story short, of course, I ended up being adopted too. However, I never went to an orphanage like the other sister that was adopted did. And by that time, my mother was working amongst the wives of the GIs, because, that's the deal. If you travel with your husband, they'll just give you a menial job. It's not going to be, so they all kind of, and this is in Kaiserslautern, which is called K-Town by anyone that goes to. So any American GI during the 50s and the 60s went through K-Town. And so my mom just kind of naturally ended up in an environment where there were lots of people to talk to. And so she just kind of put the word out and used that as a resource for finding me a home. She had put me in a home at first that was there somewhere. And the woman fell ill with polio. So she had a governess come in. And then my mother found out about it. And she was like, I'm not going to. So she, in essence, she rehomed me herself. So she, through this network of GI wives, she found out that my mother and father, my adoptive parents, were looking for a child. Now, they had already adopted my brother, who was 5 years older than I, but he was adopted here domestically in Fayetteville near Fort Bragg, which is where my father was stationed. Anyway, that's how she made the match. And I hung out with them for, on the weekends for a while. And I was born in 64. They left Germany coming back stateside in May of 65. And my adoption was finalized the day before. And it's amazing that I thought I knew everything until I met her. And so I'd known that I was adopted, had all of my father gave me. I still have my original birth certificate in onion skin. I still have all of my original adoption papers, everything, even the affidavits where between my adoptive mother and the husband. I mean, see, that's a whole nother thing. Actually, the man's name that's on my birth certificate is my next oldest sister's father, because my mother was still married to him, even though they were estranged when I was born. So at the legal ease of all of this, my mom had to write a letter to my biological mother's husband to give him permission because he had to give up parental rights in order for the adoption to go through. So I have the letter where this man says, I've been estranged from my wife since that child is not mine. So sorry, so sorry. My mom writes back pleading, and then he wrote back again. And I have it. I have like 6 copies, all of this from the military. I have all the original documents. And he's saying, I give my wife, Maria, permission to allow this child to be adopted. So it's just, so to not know is like a particular type of torture for me in this lifetime. And once we get stateside, less than 2 years later, my folks separate. Now, mind you, they were as my sister would say, my next oldest sister, she remembers the day they dropped me off. She remembers what I smell like. She remembers what I was wearing. And she saw my mother and father were such, in her mind, was such the cosmopolitan family, because he was in the military. My mother drove, she was taking college courses and driving the bus for the exceptional children to school. And it's funny because when she died year before last, I mean, I still have like the pictures of a couple of the kids that were her students and stuff like that. I mean, just stuff that she saved over the years. So, I mean, if you didn't know them and you were just looking at this, and then my brother is there too, like excited to have a sister. And even to this day, I'm still such a trigger for him, because all he wants is to see this big curly hair, that's his first vision of me. It's just amazing. So a year and a half later, we're stateside. things go south for them. And my mom, and whatever happened to them between them the night before, my mother felt her only recourse was to be gone. When my dad got home the next day for lunch, my mother and I were gone, and all we had was a shopping bag. That was it. And we left everything else. And so at that time, my brother was 8. My son is 30. I could imagine my son tearing down everything, looking for me if I were to disappear at this moment. Or you know what I mean? So I have no idea what it was like for her. I have some real memories, like maybe 2. I remember where we went. We went to stay with a friend of hers. And I remember the train station, the doors on the train station, but that's pretty much it, because I was very young at any rate. So it was 2 years before my dad even knew where we were. My mother was a licensed practical nurse, and she just went into a whole nother profession. So he really had no idea. He assumed we went to my grandmother's, and he was starting small and thinking that she was still local with friends or family and stuff, but we were in DC, and he had no way of knowing anything, So that was the kidnapping part, because by definition, no parent can do that legally. And so I definitely was, and didn't even think about that until much later. But yeah, that was definitely my circumstance. And we were in DC for I was probably there with her for about a year. But again, she's starting over. She's in her mid 40s at this point, and so that first year she didn't have a car. And I remember taking the train back down to Carolina to my grandparents. And that was the first time I ever remember meeting them, although I know they'd seen me before, but that was my first memory. And I remember getting there at nighttime, and I was like, wow, I love this. I really love this, and I'm sure that was part of the plan, but they let me think it was, it was all up to me and stuff. And I'm like, I really want to hang out here. So I stayed there until my mom got herself situated in the federal government and had a good job and a car and a larger apartment and all that. So kindergarten and first grade, I stayed with my grandparents down in Carolina. And then when she was ready to put me in private school in DC, I went back to DC. So, and that was kind of odd too, because she did not have a car actually the first few months I was back. So, and it's funny because I have friends that I've had all that time actually. And they remember, like, I used to be driven because my mom worked at the courthouse. She went into the court system, which I think was really funny. She went there before the VA, so maybe she felt safe there. Her friends at work worked in the U.S. Marshal's office. And so it was not a big deal it was not uncommon for me to be driven to school by one of the deputies, because he was, oh yeah, I can scoop her up on my way to work because I got to serve somebody over there anyway. So that's how people knew. They're like, who is this chick? She's wearing special shoes. Because I had to have my shoes made by a cobbler for 3 years because of the size of my feet, and my food was different. And I was being driven to school by a U.S. Marshal, and they're like, who is, and I started school like 2 months after everybody else got there. So it's just kind of interesting that I always felt that I always had more attention in this lifetime than I've ever wanted, and I'm just trying to come to school like everybody else, but it was just kind of, it was an interesting kind of situation there in the beginning.
Jacquelin, that's to say the least. Oh gosh, there's so many things I want to expand on. And I think that one of the first things that comes to mind is, when did you start to process that you were adopted, and when were you able to know about your folder and your documents? That's really miraculous, because most adoptees, it's a battle to get that information. And that you already had it. When did you see it for the first time? I'm just really curious about when did that come across your radar?
Okay, so during that period of time, it was that 2-year period of time when I was with my grandparents, the patriarch of my grandmother's family passed away. So that meant my mom, my aunts, everybody far and wide came home for the funeral. And to where my grandparents lived, which is where my mother and all of them grew up. And so standing outside of the church for the first time, because, in the South, everybody else comes and files in, and then the family comes in last. and the doors of the church were closed. So they said the prayer waiting for us. And we were all assembled outside. There's a bunch of us, because like I said, Uncle James would have been well into his 90s at that point. So everybody, and that's when I recognized that I didn't look like anyone else. My grandmother is also biracial. So she was fair-skinned, even though we didn't look alike, but and it was just my grandmother and my grandfather and I on our farm. So unless we went to visit someone, it was an isolated kind of life, unless we went to town or something like that, which only happened like once a month. Or I went to school, so it was just kind of a, like a real calm kind of life. But to see everyone at one time, and so that night after the funeral, my mom and I were in the bathroom and she was giving me my bath. I remember that. And that's when I asked her, I'm like, Mom, why don't I look like anybody else? And she told me the truth. She told me, I suppose, as much of the truth as she thought I could handle at that time. And she knew me. Everybody knew I was a precocious kid. I'm always asking. I was into the 5 whys early, why, And so, but I remember her telling me, and I think as I got older, I always appreciated that. And I even remember after I got to DC and we'd go to church, or we'd go to sometimes after, because we didn't have a car then either yet. So I remember like walking to church. It wasn't that far. And then going to the playground, and I called it the Long Walk Playground because it was like way like 5 or 6 blocks away at the back end of the neighborhood. And I kind of earned that. So if I was good all day, then we can go to, and so that's when I really like picked my mom's brains. And I remember saying stuff to her like, you know what, if I was walking down the street with you and I saw my mom on the other side of the street, I would still want you to be my mom. That kind of, I was like totally in love with her. And that lasted until I was about 14, somewhere around there. And so I'm a firm believer of, wherever we are, wherever we experience trauma, especially as women, if there's no intervention and we don't ever grow beyond that, that's kind of where we stay stuck emotionally. And I grew to understand my mom later, and that was right around the time she experienced her own trauma, and so it made all the sense to me as I got older. But yeah, those were some real rough patches. But I'm going to say even 4 years before that, I knew when I was 9 years old that I had to take care of myself, and I always felt that I was taking care of her emotionally. I started seeing just where she was really insecure, like helping me with my homework. And it was a word, and I'll never forget it. The word was hypothesis. And I was in the 4th grade and I didn't know how to pronounce it. And I'm like, what the heck is this? And I knew how to break it down, but I'm like, that can't be right, because it didn't even sound right to me. And my mother was, and I was like, Mom, what is this? Because I know it's not hypothesis. And she was like, yeah, no, it's hypothesis. And so of course I went to school the next day pronouncing it that way, and I got it wrong, and when I came back home and told her, her reaction to me telling her, wow, I think that was when I recognized like just the levity of it all, of her not being able to handle being wrong or incorrect in front of me, and so that changed me in a way, and then, there was a time or two I had to protect myself from a family member, and that there was an attempt to physically assault me, sexually assault me, and I took control of the situation, but the person was still in my environment for like another year, and it took me a long time to even remember that. But the thing is that and not to worry, he was dealt with years later. So
good. I'm so glad.
Yeah, I have a girlfriend, and we, it's like we're good friends because she forgets everything and I remember everything. You know what I mean? And it's like something we'll take to our grave. But I was vindicated, so not to worry about that. That's why I'm so jolly. I don't allow things to fester. You know what I mean? The things that I can control. But seriously, I think it was such an early age when I recognized that I was more emotionally mature than she was, and it's kind of it was I don't know, it was a mixture of being empowered and also feeling like, wow, but I'm still a kid, you know what I mean? And, but at the same time, I was okay with it, you know what I mean? And I felt, I saw that I was just made of something different, you know what I mean? And I had the ability to just, not just to survive, but to thrive, you know what I mean? And still, you know, because my mom was absent a lot, she worked all the time, you know, and the older I got, she took a second job. So I was getting myself home and doing my own homework and cooking my dinner and putting myself to bed because she didn't get home until midnight. So I think I was very self-sufficient very early. And I felt like I was head of household because she was never there. You know what I mean? So I found out early with all of that. And then after, I did not actually even get, I only saw my dad intermittently, not every summer, but every now and then, because as you can well imagine, I'm sure there was stuff I wasn't privy to, but I was seven. Because I remember I went to visit him on my 7th birthday and my 9th birthday. So I was 7 years old before I went to visit him. So that's how long. So from the time I was like 2.5, 3 years. So yeah, so there was a span of time before it was safe for mom would take me. Well, she still had her same girlfriends right there in the neighborhood on both sides of the house and across the street from the house. You know, I mean, and we're all still friends. I mean, I went to the next door neighbor's mother's funeral like last year. I mean, we you know, I mean, I'm still friends with everybody. You know, you want to have a healthy relationship with me, I'm there with you. I mean, that's kind of how I am about this life. But my mom would drop me off at the house and then go out and go across the street and hang out with her girlfriends. And she said, I'm going to be here for about 2 hours and go see your dad, you know, that kind of thing. So he was always there to some degree. Like once I got to late elementary into middle school, when my husband and I, ex-husband now, but when we decided to move back to Carolina because we met in DC. And we knew then that if we get married and have children, we're going south because I wanted to parent a particular way. I wanted to be free to be home. I didn't want to be pressured to have to work. I mean, I wanted to make sure that I parented, and he had an interesting situation too growing up. And so we both wanted to stop any generational trauma. We weren't going to spoon feed our kids, even anything that we were still trying to recover from. And that was most important to us, more important than anything else. And so after we moved back and our kids were, I think our daughter was probably 1.5 years or 2. That's when we started like having maybe twice a month or something. We would go down to Fayetteville and have Sunday dinner with my dad and his family. Because by the time I was 10, my dad was married again. And eventually they had children. And I'm 14 and 16 years older than they are, respectively. And so we would go down and hang out with them for Christmas. And so for Sunday dinner. So one weekend I was there, he was just like, I've always wanted to give this to you, you know, and I could not believe it. Still in the original military folder. I mean, I have it. I have every bit of it still there.
Yeah, I want to see a picture or something. That sounds amazing, Jacquelin.
You know exactly where it is. Let me go grab it.
That would be incredible.
I would love to share that to you. I'm like, nobody's ever asked me to see it before. Hold on.
Oh, I mean, if you don't mind, that'd be really cool.
Okay, I do have some stuff in more than one place, but in this folder, so here is the original folder.
Oh my gosh, for those of you that can't see this, it is, I just got goosebumps. Oh my gosh, there's like real handwriting on there, U.S. Army Ordnance Center and School.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that was
my gosh.
Yeah, and yeah, I have no idea how all this wrote. So this was my dad's. I don't know if he wrote that or not, but inside, so here is the original stuff that I wanted to tell you about.
Oh my gosh, look at the stained papers.
Yes,
wow.
This is like, look at this. This is like the old, like almost like onion skinny kind of paper. And and then it's still got the seal and the ribbons, and so that was a certification. All of this was handled. So this was done.
Oh.
This was done the 4th of March, 1965.
It's just incredible that you have these documents and they're in such good condition.
It really is. And okay, so here is this sworn affidavit as to non-paternity of child born to my mother, Maria Smith. Yes.
This is just, this paperwork changed the course of so many lives.
Yes. And see,
it's so significant.
It really is. And when I recognized like the plight of domestic born adoptees, it was really heartbreaking for me. But at the same time, one of the biggest parts of what I talked to when I had the opportunity to be at the round table with the State Department back in November was that it's not our responsibility because first of all, we shouldn't be lumped in with immigrants. We are citizens by definition. We just can't prove it. I mean, I could fill out a form and pay $1,500 in a 15-page form, and I just resent it every time I sit down to do it. I'm like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to write a check. I'm going to do it. And then I'm just like, I don't want to, I get so angry around having to do it. So my point to the State Department was, we need to educate you guys so you can educate your frontline employees. I've had a passport before, and then I lose a document, God forbid, and then I have to start all over again at the State Department and get a scheduled appointment for a passport. And, they have no idea. They're just like, oh, you need to have your original birth certificate. I'm like, well, I do. And not only do I have it, this original, but I also got a newer version, a newer copy about 20 years ago, a certified copy that, because this thing is fading. Yeah, frontline employees don't recognize it. They just assume that all adoptees have that. Like, no, we're not all the same. All of our circumstances are not the same. You really should know what a birth certificate looks like from Germany. I'm like, you know what I mean? And so it was just amazing because it took me, I don't know, I think over 10 days and 27 phone calls to the customer service manager of the State Department. And I was like, you know what? I said, I'm done right now. I said, but I'll be back and I'll be bringing some people with me. You know what I mean?
Jacquelin. Yeah. Okay. So this is something I am just learning about. I'm ashamed to say, but I'm new to the party, but here I am. So citizenship is on my list of things to talk to you about. And I think this is a perfect chance to really educate, me included. For those international adoptees, it is absolutely horrifying to imagine that you don't have citizenship in either place. Right, can you explain that to the people, what the problem is and why it exists?
Well, I definitely am at this moment a woman without a country. And I've been to and now, first of all, I mean, I've had, so it took a trip to the German consulate down in Atlanta. And I had them look over it. And even she was like, I mean, like she'd not ever seen anything like this. And she was quiet for about 20 minutes, just going, I'm waiting for some answers and so this is how we can move you to the next stage. She was like, the first thing I would suggest is that you get all of this translated to English. And I did that, but what she told me was what I really needed to hear, which I heard from nowhere else, is that she was like, love, if you were issued a US passport, you were considered a citizen, regardless of the circumstances. So here's the deal. This is the thing that most parents don't know, especially, those that are adopting. When you adopt a child from another country, it is your responsibility and you've got to do it within that first year or so. You have to either naturalize them or you've got to get another document, which would be a consular birth certificate. So that's not something, those opportunities, those are things that I can't do for myself. Those windows of opportunity were finite and a long time ago. And then when they started rewriting the rules for everyone, they didn't affect any of us that were born before 85. And it is my belief, the more and more I researched because like I said earlier, I am a person that I am an info hound. And my second job, I had 3 appointments to the Library of Congress, where I was dedicated support to the researchers. So I had access to the world's information. And so I am a huge research hound. And so what I found is that those of us that were born due to U.S. occupation in those countries, we're lumped in with immigration. It has a lot to do with war crimes. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and so to be able to extrapolate our experience from the immigration situation is why it's starting to happen, because we had that discussion with them in November, and they started amending documents and rules and laws and everything in January of this year. And so now, like, we've got a direct connection with them. We don't have to call them or anything. They just send us stuff as it automatically happens. And they're like, and this is done, and this is done, and this has been done. And so it is happening slowly. And I'm sure the things that have happened so far are most helpful, especially to the adoptees from the Asian countries. It is unfortunate, like, it is illegal for most of them to even search. So for that, I feel so privileged in a way, and it's just, I'm just kind of stubborn in a way. And I've been standing on ceremony when it comes to, because my situation is an easy fix. It's just that I feel like I shouldn't have to, you know what I mean? But
I think there's so many layers that, adoptees have to deal with. You have to deal with the initial relinquishment.
Yes.
And then, and it's just like one more massive thing to have to deal with. It is a lot. And I'm so sorry that you had to go through that.
And it's, actually it's more of a, more of an awakening to the world's problems, all of the ill, because I've always felt like, oh, this is it's not about race. It's not about this. What it's really, really about, it's about the division of men and women after we stopped practicing paganism. You know what I mean? Like way back when the patriarchy took, that's what we need to concentrate on, because then what happens to women and children wouldn't be an issue now if we had never lost that connection between the two primal beings, And so that's kind of where I'm at, because what's amazing to me is the similarities between my moms were as different as they were alike.
Tell me more about your moms, because
what was it like? Yeah, so I had this for a while, plus all of the information that I had gathered when I was in high school, because then it was just, I'm like, I'm here, so let me see if I can find my mom, if I could find. And so I had like 3 telephone numbers that matched her name in that area. And I got that from the library. I was 17, held on to it. And 10 years later, I'm in the bed at 2:00 in the morning. I was venting about something. And my husband banged on the light. He was like, get that folder. Where's your folder? I'm going to call right now. Because I think over time, I probably had tried to call her, and maybe I was just emotional when I looked at things. So I was misreading what I had here and understanding the difference between how things are written in German and how they're written in English, transposing the dates and all that. So I was thinking my mom's middle name was her first name and da-da-da-da-da. Well, my husband looked at it and saw what he saw, and he called whatever High Seas is. That's what it said on the phone bill, whatever the international 411 number is. And he had my mom on the phone in like 15 minutes. One thing that is really true about Germans is that they typically stay in one place. It's almost like they look down on a nomadic kind of lifestyle. They are real creatures of habit. And my mother was still living in the same place she lived when I was born.
That's crazy. Jacquelin.
Yes. And
so
it's funny because again, like I said, she survived Hitler's Germany. She had already been a victim a time or two of, men removing older women from their money, that kind of thing, just a ruthless kind of paramour, that kind of thing. So she was not that receptive to my husband right away. She didn't believe he was who he was or anything like that. And she was, and she thought she was talking about she was thinking she was talking about my sister, who actually lived here in the States then and was married to a man, and she was thinking she was talking to him, and then he was like, no, you need to have a daughter named Jacqueline. And she just fell apart. And then we got on the phone, and it was just, I was a chemist at that point. And so for like 2 or 3 weeks, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. And I would go to work and get like 8 hours worth of work done in 2. And then I was just in some parallel universe for the rest of the day. And I was in a male-dominated environment. This story just knocked those guys to their knees. I go to work and the guys were crying and tell me more, Jackie. It was just an interesting thing. And she sent me pictures. She said, I'm going to send you pictures. She didn't really want to talk to me over the phone. She let me talk. And that's when I found out my father's name. She couldn't believe that I didn't know my dad. I left all of that stuff. When I dropped you off, I left you with a bag of things and your father's information. And I'm like, never got any of that,
Wow.
And I decided that I wasn't going to make a big deal out of that with my parents, because once they found out, just having that knowledge alone was more than they could deal with, and it was just just to watch them. So case in point, my mom came down, my adoptive mom came down to visit. And I don't remember if I told my biological mother that she was going to be there then or not, because at that point we were talking probably once every month, something like that. She called. And I was like, oh, hi, and I was like, and guess who's here this weekend? She's like, I'd like to talk to her. And I was like, Mom, it's Mom. You want to talk to
Mom
her?
And mom.
Yeah, and so, yeah, because I'm not like really into labels, you know what I mean? So it's just kind of, when I talk about it, I don't always remember to say a mom or biological mom or whatever, so sometimes, so if you ever need clarity, please feel free to remind me. But so watching my adoptive mother, talk to her on the phone, and I'd never, because my mother, both of my mothers were just headstrong, I can do it all myself, whether anybody helps me or not. And that's the way, and my house is taken care of, my stuff is super clean, all my bills are paid at the latest on time, I'm in control of this life. So it was all about what it looked like versus what it was like on the inside. So that's why I'm like the antithesis of that. It's all about what's on the inside, for me. And the pain that I saw, it was the first time in my life that I saw my mother like not be in control. And I saw her, she was apologizing to my biological mother, because my mother said, you told me that you were going to stay in my life and that you were going to let me know how my child was doing, and you were going to, And so by this time, when we first talked, the very first conversation my biological mother and I had, she knew that my folks didn't stay together, and that it was short-lived right after the adoption was final. And that just, it was like the last thing in the world she wanted for me, And so it was just, and both of, at this point in their lives, they were both, at that point, they were both in their late 60s, because they were exactly the same age, like born the same damn year. Can you imagine? Isn't that just mind blowing? And so,
it is.
It was just, I couldn't believe it. And I was like, oh my goodness. So then, because this was something my mother never discussed. She never talked about any of that. I didn't know any of the things my mom told me until I talked to her for that first time. Probably only, because I knew everything else. I knew her story. I knew all that, but I probably only had 3 questions for her really when I first met her. And one of those was, who is my dad? And she was like, how do you not know who your dad is?
So you're kind of seeing this betrayal.
Yeah. And so to really watch that exchange between, and I hated it. I felt sorry for my mom, but I was like, but you did this, you know what I mean? And this is where you get. So I just left the room because they needed to have that moment. And I didn't, you know what I mean? I would, and even, and my dad, it took me 90 days. It took me almost 4 months before I let my my adoptive family know that I found my mother, because it was my secret and my life was different. And so then it was filling voids that I had just, I had just compartmentalized that. Like, I'm just going to put it over here on the shelf because, there's nothing else for me to do with it other than to know about it at this point. You know what I mean? And so I didn't have any, because I felt so well informed. I really had no animosity because I took time to understand the circumstances in everybody's life, except for my dad, because, I just kind of felt differently about him. My dad's just kind of living his life in a way that made him happy with not a whole lot of regard to anybody else's feelings, so I felt differently. I loved him, but I was very matter of fact about him. And which was a little different than being with my mother, because my mom was my person, and then after I met my biological mother, I was probably already 3 years, I was elbow deep in with a life coach at that point, you know what I mean? So I already had a lot of coping skills, and I'm so glad that I had, because she was not healthy emotionally. It was, she had a tough life, and at some point, after that, like after my dad and all of that stuff, she, really, really just was, she hated men. She had, it's like she didn't really have, she was sad all the time. She, it's awful when we as women, because we're the nurturers by nature. So if we can't forgive ourselves for the choices that we've made, then we cease to be able to love unconditionally.
Yeah, Jacquelin.
Yeah, and to not be able to forgive yourself is a very difficult, because my sisters that grew up with her, I definitely had a far different life than they did. And me coming into the picture changed things a little bit for them, and it was touch and go for a long time. That Christmas, everybody came to my house, and it was that whole nature versus nurture thing. When I saw my sisters for the first time, we kind of dressed the same, even though we don't all look alike. We all have the same complexion. We all have dark hair and stuff, but we kind of danced the same. We were listening to the same music. We had the same damn watch. That classic Timex that was gold and silver.
Oh yeah, I remember.
We had that, and we were wearing. I was just like, oh my goodness, So it was, but at the same time, it didn't take me long. The first time she came over, she came and stayed for 3 months, and I took a sabbatical from work so I could be with her the whole time, because why not? You know what I mean? This is our moment, and I wasn't going to try to fit it into something small. I gave it the room that I had to give it, Getting back to how this affected my adoptive parents. My father was not honest with people, his family, the community, about my biology. He led everybody to believe that I was a product of a relationship that he had with a German woman while in Germany. So of course, when my mom found that out, she was, that just all that, like you saw the 100% traumatic kind of, and I didn't even tell him. I told my stepmom, we were doing Oktoberfest, because we both had kids. I had kids, my stepsisters were younger, and we did Oktoberfest like 2 or 3 years in a row. And so that year, because I made contact with my mom the 1st of June. So this is in the end of September, 1st of October. And I just couldn't, by this time I had already told my family, but my family doesn't have any relationship with my stepmom. I do, so, or my dad. They would just cross paths every now and then at graduation or something like that. But no, they were not friendly at all. And so I had a relationship with her from the time I was 10. She was the good egg in that bunch, and she made sure I was okay, and I'll love her for that, still do. But I told her, and she had no idea, because her husband hadn't been honest with her. And she's like, I had no idea. And I was like, well,
the lie.
Yeah. And then so a couple of months later, he called me on a Saturday And I knew what he was calling for. Because his wife and the girls, they were concert strings. So they were at Elon College for the day. And I happened to be in the house alone because my husband was out with the kids. And when I saw the phone and it was him, I'm like, oh God, I know what this is about. We got to talking and he never brought it up. And I wasn't going to bring it up, because this man used to call me. His birthday was also an Aquarian. His birthday is 3 days after mine. He would call me on his birthday to wish me happy birthday over the years, when I was growing up. So I wasn't, I wasn't gonna, I knew how to deal with him. So I wasn't gonna bring it up. And so I was like, okay, Dad, well, I want to enjoy the house while I got it to myself, And he was like, oh, so I hear you found your mother. And I was like, yes, I certainly did. And I didn't say anything else. And then he said, I wonder if she remembers me. And I said, oh, she certainly does. And I was like, and she's actually coming in 2 months. She'll be here for 90 days. Maybe we'll get down that way. 40 days later, he had a stroke and he came home. He'd been home for 2 months. My mom was here December to February, and he passed away a week before she left to go back to Germany. And again, it just confirms that whole, it doesn't matter how far and fast you fly. You can't ever, wherever you go, there you are. I don't think they thought in a million years that I would ever find her, that would ever happen. They just felt they get on a plane and just leave all that behind. Yeah.
That is so intense.
Yeah.
And I know we're getting down to like the last 10 or 15 minutes. And I just feel like you have such a stability about you and a strength about you. And I think it would be amazing for you to speak to adoptees, birth parents, adoptive parents.
Yes.
If you had their ears, what advice would you give them? And also, before we go, I wanted to talk about your ways of coping. Like I see that you turn to music and to art. And so if you can just like wrap all that up in a pretty Jacquelin package, that would be a great way to bring it all together for us.
Sure. Well, I do actually participate in a couple of, in a couple of platforms. So I think for anyone that's considering adoption, because these were some of the things that we discussed with the State Department, because this was not about that. This wasn't the immigration department that we were talking about. This was the Department of Child Welfare, which is where adoption falls under, whether it, domestic or, but specifically international, is that you have to really be honest with yourself about why you want to adopt. And if it's really about family preservation, or does it have something to do with what you feel you're lacking? Because helping yourself to someone else's child is not going to make that better. So I think there really needs to be some, really, really understand why you want to do it. And then once you answer those questions, maybe what you end up doing looks different. Maybe you can help, but maybe you can help in another way, like helping a family stay together, using those same resources that you would have to use to acquire this child to help that family stay together. I think that's pretty much it. And just talking to adoptees, people that have, because we've got the lived experience, and so I don't care what you read in a book or what education you have, or unless you've lived it, you really don't understand all of the nuances, how an extended family responds to you and that kind of thing, and matriculating through school, how to deal with a doctor and all of those questions that we all seem to be so normal. How do you answer questions about medical history when you have no idea? So in those moments and then how to respond, like how do you respond to when you say something to someone and then they just give their off the cuff responses. So there are lots of things that you actually have to help that child deal with, even if you've bought, so I would say to anyone that's thinking about adopting a child, that they should actually become parts of groups that have adoptee voices, active adoptee voices, so they can ask those questions honestly. And I see people doing that, which is really nice as well too. And I also see people that are getting heightened awareness now after having adopted years ago and now wanting to grow themselves and understand more, because now they've got a child that has changed because they've gotten older, and now, that whole thing, if it's just a kid, they won't remember. Well, no, but the nervous system never forgets. And it's the subconscious mind that controls our behavior and our actions. And so in that whole ghost kingdom thing, did we ever, that's where some adoptees, are you watching This Is Us at all? Are you watching?
You know what? I have been reading author books and I haven't been watching much TV, but I did see a post that they did a really good job about an adoption. So I don't know.
Yeah, just watch that. But at any rate, so that is actually putting verbiage out there in the mainstream that wasn't there before. It's really getting to the nuts and bolts of an adult adoptee dealing with a lifetime that was not discussed, and then finding a parents late in life, which is quite common right now. So people always ask, the ghost kingdom is some adoptees create, because of their environmental experiences, they create an escape, like they might fantasize about who, like, because if you don't know, then your parents can be anybody. You know what I mean? Oh, my dad's the president. And my mom was a neurosurgeon. You know what I mean? It could be anything. And so lots of adoptees did that as a coping skill. No different. It's just I would think like an adoptee-centric type of disassociation. So I never did that because I was quite happy, as a kid. But my escapism definitely was crosswords and books. So I always feel like I'll probably write some book here. I'm like, I've got like 9 half-written pieces of whatever, you know what I mean? And so it's just sometimes I do that. And then I did therapeutic writing for a long time. But when I was in high school was when I really embraced art, whether it was making jewelry or hooking rugs or self-portraits and that kind of thing, or just any kind of expression. And then music has always been a big part of my life because even though I've got 1 million siblings, I grew up alone. I didn't grow up with any siblings in my household. It was just me and adults. So I had lots of freedom with indefinite boundaries, you know what I mean? And so it was always music. So I sang, sang in the choir in high school. I still do it. I sing in a flash chorus, which is like a choir. If you ever heard of that, I was doing that locally. I have done between 85 and 90,000 crosswords. So at this point, I've been doing them since I was 6 years old, and I do at least one a day. So sometimes it's quite compulsive. So that's how I can tell like where I am mentally, because then I won't want to do it. Like a couple of months ago by and I haven't done a crossword puzzle.
So it's a gauge for you.
So that's kind of how I keep myself. And plus, like I said, I did have 8.5 years of time with a life coach. It took 5 times. She was a 5th person because the other ones I'm like, oh my God, if you just ask this first question and your eyes are like glazing over at that answer, I'm like, yeah, we can't, there's nothing, we can't help each other. We can't participate because if that was too much for you, I haven't even told you anything yet, So it was the 5th person that I sought out that was actually the best fit for me. And that was just really because what I needed more than anything else was information. So what I did was I took the time to understand every family that I was part of, my biological family, my adoptive family, and the family that I married into. And then I could understand how the similarities, and also because I felt like until I understood that, I was going to continue to attract that kind of energy. I don't want that anymore. I understand it, and I understand, and it's and it's also one of those things where I kind of felt badly for the people in my life because they never took the time to do that for themselves, and all 3 of those families were hugely dysfunctional, and so to me it's all about understanding human nature and understanding why people do the things they do. And I feel that by understanding all of that and taking the time, it helps me understand everyone and to treat everyone with a modicum of compassion that I would not have been able to do. And then also it was freeing for me. I mean, it's hugely liberating because now I feel I had to apologize to my husband, you know what I mean? Because I didn't know who I was until I was 29. When I got that first photo album from my mom, which was on that slow boat from China, I must say, it took 13 days. And I was 29 years old before I saw people who looked like me. So I had, and I had to apologize to him. And I'm like, you know what? I need to do this. I really need to do this. And at some point we recognized that we could not maintain our relationship and me continue this journey. I mean, it's good, bad, or indifferent. It just was what it was. And I'm so happy that we loved each other enough to let each other go. So, because isn't that really loving each other if you want the other person to be happy, even if it's not with you, you know what I mean? And he's been married for like 11 years and his wife and I are friends. We're all Aquarius. I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
And you all wear patchouli.
Yeah, it's like,
Oh, Jacqueline.
But yeah, so I think those are the things that, that have helped me and just made me see people differently. But also, just recognizing how important it is for me to live my life at my highest expression, because I recognize that it gives other people the permission to do the same thing. And I just, when both of my mothers, and I think that was the thing that you may have read in that thing that I did last year, is that they both died. They both left this life wanting more, just wanting more and more and more, and wishing they could have been given this or that if they had the support of their communities, or if they'd had the real support of their husbands. But I also believe that if I can't speak my truth to who I am, then I'm only going to attract that which is there to exploit what I don't know about myself. You know what I mean? And I don't think they ever grew beyond that. And there was one person in my life who did, and that was my grandmother. And I feel like I'm more my grandmother's daughter and I'm definitely my grandmother's child. I mean, she found love late in life. She and my grandfather, she was almost 60, he was almost 80, and they still lived 23 years together. And it was the most beautiful thing to witness. So it's always given me hope. So there was no surprise to me that I'd not have a husband at this point, because I know that, that's still possible, but right now, I have a really, really empty nest. My children are happy and well-adjusted and all of that, which I couldn't be happier as a mom. And so this moment really is mine. And this moment finally is all about me. And I'm taking full advantage of that. So.
Oh, Jacqueline, this last hour with you has just been a delight.
Oh.
Like your strength just jumps out. And it's so energizing to hear you take control of your story and your destiny by informing yourself. And I think a lot of us are afraid what we might find with the truth, but we have to believe that we are capable with support and help to be able to take that truth and help ourselves heal so that we can have a fuller life. And I just know that this podcast is going to help a lot of people. And I'm so grateful to you. And I'm hoping we talked a little bit, everyone, about Jacqueline maybe contributing a little music and art. So we might not be seeing the last of her.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Jacqueline,
sure. I would love to.
Well, I just hope you have a beautiful day, and I can't wait to see you again. Thank you so much.
I appreciate your time. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, it's my honor, Jacqueline.